Hi everyone, today we are going to do the jewelry design piece that was chosen, and it's Amo's piece. In this design, it's very important to first, when you get the design, is to work out your actual size of the piece of glass. So what is your dimensions that you are working with? In this way, it makes your cutting of your glass easier, understanding how it's going to be placed on, especially with a jewelry piece. What we need to remember is that it can't be too big, especially with glass because it's heavy. So one needs to remember that the size is quite important with a jewelry piece. Okay, what are we going to do first? I have my dimensions already marked on my design. So first thing I'm going to need is a piece of glass. We are working with 3mm glass. We're also going to need our PPE, which is just glass spectacles. And we need tips. We need a ruler. We need a marker. These here are our happy snappers. The part where we adjust the tension for the happy snapper to do with the thickness of the glass always faces up, and you'll see a line in the middle there. That line must be on either side of where you have just cut the glass. And then you obviously apply pressure down and it will snap away from each other. These here are our grousers, and we use it to remove small bits of glass by pulling down and away. And of course, our glass cutter. Okay, so what we're first going to do is we're going to mark out, putting our PPE on. There we go. This is that when we break the glass, that no shards go into our eyes. We need to protect, obviously, need to protect our eyes. Okay, our ruler and our marker we're going to use first. All right, so I need to mark this out, so I'm going to quickly do that, and then I'll start the cutting process. Okay, so when I'm cutting glass, I'm always going to work with one of the dimensions first, and you normally cut it through. In this way, you ensure, because you're not going to cut halfway into a piece of glass and then cut another direction. Glass needs to travel through. So I'm going to make sure that my ruler is placed securely on my glass. I'm going to open up my tips. Tips helps to glide the glass cutter on top of the glass. So I first run it along my line that I've marked so I can lubricate that area. And then when I go back, I make sure that the nail, or the screws area of your glass cutter is facing up. I apply pressure and I cut through. One can use, quite simple, use a happy snapper. Same thing again, where the tension, when you can adjust for the screw, is placing up, and you will see a dividing line in the middle of the happy snapper. That line goes either side of where you cut. You apply pressure and it snaps. Okay. All right, so this is now a 50mm piece of glass. This is the diameter at the top that we need for the jewelry piece. Now I'm going to mark the bottom section for the height. The height we are working with is 50mm. Okay. Again, I'm dipping my glass cutter into some tips, placing my ruler, gliding it first, and then cutting through, using the happy snappers to break the glass. Okay, there we go. We have now a square, and now we're going to manipulate the shape to more a diamond form or shape. So next, I'm going to do the next marking, and I need the bottom section to be 40mm. So I'm going to mark 5 in on each side. And I'm going to, and then I'm going to draw a line from the top corner to the where I marked that 5 mil to get the right diagonal line. Okay, so there's the shape there, and now I'm going to cut that. Again, glass cutter into the tubes, placing my ruler securely on the glass, gliding the tubes, and then cutting through. I'm going to cut the other side as well. Again, tubes. Okay. I'm actually going to use the grouser, which I'm going to hold exactly where the cutting line is and pull it away. Do it for the same other side, next to the glass cut line, and pull away. And there we go. We have our first shape that we need for our design. Okay, I'm going to put that aside. That's the top section. Now I need to cut exactly the same shape again for the bottom part of the design. Using the marker, I'm cutting first, marking out first my 50 mils. Then going to use my glass cutter into the tubes, glide along the surface first, and then go back, apply pressure and cut through. We can use our happy snapper, break it apart, and we have our first, we have our bottom section, the right width at the top. Now we need to mark down to get our length, which is going to be 50 millimeters. Glass cutter into tubes. Using my happy snappers, breaking the two pieces apart. All right, so we have our 50 millimeters square, and now we need to bring that bottom section in. So we're going to mark 5 mils at the bottom, and then join it up to the opposite angle or corner. Okay, once we've done that, we're going to cut those sections. Side. Okay, we're going to use our grouser, again placing it along the cutting line and pulling it away. Down and away. There we go. Now we have this way around. Looking at the design, we have the top and the bottom of the design. Our next section that we are going to cut are the little half circles that we need that are going to go on top of those triangular shapes. I'm also going to work with a square, and then from the square I'm going to remove the corners to create the circle, because our glass cutter does not cut such a small circle, so we have to do it by hand. And then the sharp edges on the corner we are going to polish away, that you won't see, that it will become a beautiful round circle. Okay, what I'm going to do though with the design, I'm going to make it more of an egg shape than using a round circle. And you'll understand this when I polish it, because otherwise it doesn't end up in the proper position with the actual design. Okay. So if my top part is 50 mils, I want the whole circular part to be a 40 centimeter or 40 millimeter circle. Okay. So I'm going to cut my 40 millimeter square, first side. Happy snappers. And then I need to mark out the other side. Oh, actually, we're not going to make it a square. So what I've done, remembered I said we're going to keep it more an egg shape, which is easier for the design. So for the length, we've done a 40 by a 50, which is going to be easier now to cut out our section, our little egg shape that we're going to use in the middle, and then we're going to cut that in half so it sits on either side equally. Okay. I'm going to try and draw this in by freehand. Let me just get my middle sections. Two. Okay, so I've made little pinpoint sections to know where my middle sections are, so that when I'm drawing my circle, I know I need to touch those points to make the complete egg circle in the middle. All right, so there's my basic egg shape that I have, and now I'm going to remove what glass I can, and the rest I'm going to polish away. Okay, so I'm first going to remove my outer corners. And I'm going to use the grouser just to break those off. Okay, so I can see now I can go back and remove some more. Remove those sections using the happy snapper, the grouser. Okay, as you can see, my shape is starting to form now. So I'm going to leave it currently where it is, and I'm going to polish those sections away to create the full egg shape. Our second design is slightly bigger than the first one. We're going to cut that piece of glass for that jewelry piece now. Again, we're going to need our ruler, our marker, our glass cutter, our happy snappers, and our grouser. Right. I've worked out the dimensions already in advance, so it makes it easier for me to know what I'm cutting. Oh, and obviously our terps. Okay, so I was saying it makes it easier now to go ahead and cut because I know the dimensions that I'm using for the jewelry piece. So the top piece, I need an 80 millimeter. So I'm first going to cut that. I'm now going to mark the 80 millimeter mark for the top part of the jewelry design. Once again, to remember, like I said previously, when cutting glass, you always cut one line through and then go back and cut your other lines. You never try and cut the one line and then cut another one into it because they will end up running and then your design will be, your shape will be wrong. Opening up my terps. Terps is to help the glass cutter glide across the glass. Always put a lubricated line first and then go back, apply pressure and cut through. Pick up our happy snappers, place it in between that line and snap the glass apart. All right. Now I need to work out the height of it, which is again 80. So I'm going to end up with an 80 millimeter square. Oh, sorry, I first need my marker. Can't cut without having a mark first. What does make glass easier to cut is also working with a straight edge ruler, and obviously with a sponge back so it's softer on the glass and it doesn't end up scratching it. Okay. First again, putting that lubricated line, then going back and scoring the glass with the glass cutter, using the happy snappers, and snapping the two pieces of glass apart. Okay, so I now have my 80 millimeter square, and now I need to cut back into the square to make it a more triangular shape that she has. And the bottom section is a 60. So I'm going to go in by 5 mils and 5 mils and then take that point, draw it up to the top line on either side so we can make sure that we have an even design on both sides, symmetrical. Again, marker. Marking the 5 mils on either side. I'm now going to mark 1.5 centimeters on either side and make a point, which I'm going to draw from the top diagonal line so we can make sure that the design is symmetrical on either side. What's always important is to refer back to the original design and make sure what you're visually seeing and what you're seeing on your design are corresponding. Okay. Right, now I'm going to use my grouser, go straight to the line where I've scored the glass and put it away. To the line where I scored the glass, pull down. Nope, wants to be a bit more stubborn. Pull down. Oh, that does happen sometimes, not a problem. You can just go back and just remove those pieces. It might have a bit of a sharp edge now, which is not a problem. We're going to take it to the linisher polisher just now in any way, and we'll just remove that excess glass that's sticking out. Now that I have the main piece of glass, which is going to sit over here, I now need to go back and cut the circles that are needed. Right, let me first clear my space. So for the top circle, let me first work out what I'm going to need. Okay, if I work with a 6 centimeter, 60 mil circle for the half circle for the top, that should work. So I want to get a piece of glass here. Just want to cut this piece of glass that I have a bit straighter so it's easier to work with. Okay, right. Now, sorry guys, it still looks a bit skewed. Never mind. Okay, I'm now going to mark the 6 centimeters right through. Glass cutter into the terps. Make sure your ruler is placed nicely on the line. First glide the terps across, apply pressure to score the glass, use the happy snapper to remove the one part from the other. Okay, then I'm going to mark another 60. So I want to end up with a 60 square. Into our terps. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing again. We're going to go back into the square and mark our middle sections for each point, and then go by hand and draw our circle in. So I first need to mark my half midpoints. Okay, you'll see I've marked all the midpoints, and I'm going to go in and draw my circle in by hand. Right, there's my rather hand-drawn circle. I'm going to remove the excess glass, and remember we'll polish it up to a rounder shape on the linisher in the cold shop. Grouser, just remove them away. All right, now I have my basic shape, which I'm going to finish in the cold shop area using the linisher to remove the excess glass that is unwanted still. Okay, from the circle, we only need half of it. So I'm actually going to use that middle line now and cut it in half so that we don't waste polishing this other half unless you want to make another piece of jewelry for the same size. And then you can just polish that section into a half circle. So let me do that. Okay, using my happy snappers. All right, so there we go. I have that half circle, which is going to be sitting on the top section of our jewelry piece. Obviously, we're going to polish that off still. And now I'm going to cut the little circle for the bottom area. Just quickly work out the size. Okay, I'm going to work with a 40 diameter square millimeters. Right, let me just go for one bigger. As you can see, I'm always using offcuts. This, never throw your offcuts away. One can always go back and use them. Okay, first I'm going to mark. First get my first section. Remember, the smaller one cuts with glass, the harder it becomes. Okay. To our tips. Once again, now we have our square. We're going to make the midpoints where we can make our circle by freehand, and then we're also going to cut that in half as we only need one half of the circle. Okay, I have all my midpoint sections. And now I'm going to draw in by freehand. Right, now we have our circle. We're going to remove our excess corners away. And we're going to pick up our browser and remove those corners. Right, and I'm going to cut this funny looking circle at the moment in half. Pick up our happy snappers, cut it in half, and then we have our next half circle for the bottom part of the design. Okay, now next what we need to do is we need to get ready to go into the cold shop area where we will polish all the sides to create a beautiful piece from what we see from the actual design before going ahead and doing the painting section. Hi everyone, welcome to the cold shop. The cold shop is the area where we do everything cold related with glass, so our polishing and our drilling. Okay, what's very important is that we have spectacles for any sharp glass obstacles or shards coming out at us, so it's very important to put that on. Okay, and what's also very important is our earplugs to protect our ears from the loud noises. This is our linisher machine, and we have, this is our on button, the green one, and then the red one is our off button. At the back here is the lever for the water. What's important is we need to remember that when we polish with glass, that we need water, as the glass needs to be cooled down, otherwise it heats up and it has a very good chance of cracking. I'm going to demonstrate the polishing of this piece, and I'm going to create it into a round circle. All right, so first thing, earplugs in, and switching the machine on, and then when polishing, you always make sure that you are above the sanding belt, okay? And you never apply a lot of pressure because that would just break the belt. One actually just uses the momentum of the sand belt, and you're just holding the glass and moving it. And remember to keep moving the glass piece, otherwise you're going to sand that area flat. What you could see from the video, from what I did as well, you polish one side at an angle and you'll turn it around to another 45-degree angle and you'll polish the other side. And you'll keep continuing on the linisher machine until you get your desired shape that you want for your design. Drill press machine in the cold shop area. Right, we switch on again with the green button, and then we'll switch it off with the red button at the top. What is also important, again, to wear our clear spectacles for any objects for our eyes, and again we need to wear earplugs for the noise. I have already marked out, it's always a good idea to mark out the positioning of where your holes will be before you start drilling. I have a 6mm Habit diamond drill bit in the machine, and what I'm first going to do is checking my lining up of the hole that I have, well, the marker I have made and the drill. So I'm happy with that. This is our water. Again, we need water because otherwise our glass will get hot and it will crack. So we need water to cool it down. So we're first going to open our water a little bit. Once we have our water on, we're going to switch our machine on at the green button, and the red button is for switching off. There we have our drilled piece of glass. When drilling, always ensure that you're holding the glass down firmly and that you're doing it in slow motion. And this is also to ensure that you do not put too much pressure on the glass, otherwise there's a big chance of it cracking.
Hello everyone, today I'm going to show you how to do a general painting techniques for the designs that is required. The first thing I'm going to show you is a little sample piece of glass. We're going to do all the wet and dry applications on this piece of glass just to show you the general applications. First of all, PPE. It's very important to wear your gloves. We must wear gloves because the chemicals in the paint are quite poisonous. It contains lead, and if you're pregnant, I would suggest not to work with these paints at all. Alright, now you must wear your mask so you can protect yourself from breathing in all these dangerous chemicals when you're doing a dry application or wet application. And it's also very important to work in a well-ventilated area. Alright, so now we are going to use a dry application technique, and the tools that we'll need is a sieve. And the colors that we'll use is a yellow brown, and an orange. This is just to create a nice little sunset feel. When working with enamels, it's important to know which temperatures that you are working with. So at the moment I'm using high temp enamels, but the application is exactly the same for low temperature enamels. It's just when it comes to painting with these different temperatures, the texture of the paint differs. So for low temperatures, the paint texture is a lot harsher and a lot crispier. And for high temp enamels, the paint texture becomes a lot softer and a lot smoother. All right. Now for the dry application, we have our sieve and we have a spatula. We use a spatula just to pick up our enamel and to apply it into our sieve, and we're just gonna sieve it onto our glass. Alright, it's also important to work on a clean surface or on top of a piece of paper so you don't mess, and all that excess can just fall onto the paper. Alright, so we're just going to tap a certain area and just repeat this process. Just to make sure you get an even coating. The tricky parts are on the edges, because we tend to think that they're all coated, but they're actually not. And we just repeat the same process with the other colors. Come in with our yellow brown. And we apply under our orange. You can overlap the colors slightly, and that's just how we get that that blend of colors that the sunset has. Right, and then we work our way backwards. that is our sunset dry application. You can use the sieving technique in various ways. You can also create a stencil for yourself with different designs, different patterns. You place it on your glass and you just sieve on that stencil. You can just remove the stencil and you have a beautiful dry application of enamels. All right, now this is a sample piece of what we basically just did. And it is a 2-layer piece of glass, and the enamel is fused between those 2 sheets of glass. This sample is for Amo's jewelry piece. It has a sunset design, and that is basically what I just showed you. It's also very important to remember that high temp enamels can be fused between 2 sheets of glass, and it can be applied on the surface of the glass. However, low temp enamels can only be applied on the top layer of glass and not between, because that requires to go to a higher temperature. Okay, now that we've done our dry application, I'm going to show you how to do a wet application. The tools that we'll need is our spatula, so you make sure that's clean. Always have some paper, just to always keep your tools clean. Here are our brushes, our enamel paint, which is a high temperature of black, and our painting medium, and our water. And for certain techniques, it's always nice to have a little needle with a little bit of a spatula, small spatula. Right. Oh, and our sieve again. Okay, the first step is to sieve our enamel paint into our working palette, which is this block of glass over here. It's always nice or important to work in small samples of paint. Then you can always come back and add more. Oops, sorry.
Yeah, good.
So we are sieving our enamel through just to get rid of these little bumps or clumps. And just smooth that out. Then we just create a little hole in the middle. Then we take our painting medium. The painting medium helps the enamel to stick to the glass. If you just use water, the consistency of the paint tends to fade out. And we would like our colors to be solid. So if we use lots of water, you're going to have a very light, watered down texture on your glass. So I just scoop a little bit of medium into our little hole. Then we're just going to grind and smooth that out, mix it through. The consistency that we're looking for is, it's not too runny and it's not too thick. So it's almost like a gouache consistency if you've worked with gouache paint. And to compare it to something, it's almost like medicine, like cough syrup consistency. All right, this painting technique on how to do a wet application is exactly the same for all paints. So that's your high and low temps. All right, now I come in with a brush. Let's use, okay. Let's use this one and a nice big one. All right, I'm just gonna wet our brush in some water. I'm just going to lift our enamels from the palette. So I'm just going to gather as much as I can onto the brush. And I'm going to now explain the different applications with the wet enamels. So the first one is a dabbing technique where you want a solid texture. So you're basically flooding the paint. And then our next application can be just a stroke. So you get a bit of a brush texture. You add more water into your brush, paint will flow, will fade out a little bit at the end. Every time you move back into the paint gets lifted up back into the paintbrush. So it's always important to have one stroke of the application with your paintbrush, otherwise it lifts back if you paint back and forth. But that also depends on the texture and the technique that you are looking for. All right, and then we have another technique I can show you. We have a big brush. Let's give it some water. Just lift that all up. I'm just gonna go straight across, just so that you can see the texture of the paintbrush. When you lift the glass up, you can start to see the texture from the paintbrush. So you have the one application where you're dabbing and letting the paint flood, then you have the other technique where you can just brush it through. All right, there's another technique that you can use when the paint is dry. You can take a needle and you can scratch back into your paint. You can't see it now, but when it is dry, it leaves the exposure of the glass, so you can create really fine detail into your paintings. Yeah, so you can also use a needle to redefine or define your edges a bit more and to add in a lot of detail. There's a lot of techniques that you can use, just like in normal painting on a canvas. You can apply the same techniques onto glass. So if you want to dab, you may dab. It will end up looking like that. It all depends on you.
Hi everyone. I'm going to discuss with you the application of applying plaster to your kiln shelves and your molds. And the reason we do this is that to make sure that the glass does not stick to the surface we are using in the kiln. I'm going to be showing the wet application, as in this way, when we do a wet application, you do not show any texture, it will create a smooth surface. One can also sieve the powdered plaster onto the surface, and this way you'll pick up more a textured surface if that is what you require. But for this technique, we want a nice smooth surface for all our molds. What we are going to need is our half-mast respirator, because we don't want to breathe plaster in, as it's rather dangerous for our lungs, as it actually solidifies inside the lungs. We also need a goat hair soft brush, and this is what we're going to use to pick up the water plaster mixture that we're going to create or make, and that's what we're going to use to apply onto our surfaces. We also need a bucket with clean water inside. We do not need much, as well as my other bucket that has plaster. All right, please make sure that your kiln shelf has been cleaned before applying your new mold mix onto the surface, as any old plaster on the surface may create devitrification, which is that crystal milky layer that you find on top of glass, which is rather unappealing. Let me explain to you what I'm going to do first before putting my respirator on, otherwise my sound will be too muffled. So I have a basic water, clean water inside my bucket, and I'm going to sieve a little bit of my plaster into the water. It is important to remember we're not making a mold, so we don't need to apply a lot of plaster. It's a watered down mixture of plaster and water. Okay, I can take my respirator off because all the dust is gone. And I'm going to pick up my brush and I'm going to mix that water and the plaster into each other. As you can see, it's a very watered down water and plaster mixture. All right, so this brush allows us to pick a lot of the water up at a time, to be able to make one brush stroke. Do not go back on itself, as it will lift with the previous plaster that you have just applied. When you put your brush back down in your bucket, remember to go all the way to the bottom, because your plaster will tend to settle at the bottom of this mixture. So you can see I'm applying one direction first, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply in the opposite direction afterwards, and the reason for doing this is to create less brush marks on the surface, because glass is able to pick up the texture that one puts on the surface. I normally do this 3 times. And it's a good idea to do this the day before, because you want the kiln shelf to be completely dry before putting your glass on top of this kiln shelf. If there's still moisture on your kiln shelf, it will create steam, and that will also can cause devitrification or bubbles on the surface of your glass. As you can see, I'm going back to put my 3rd layer in. And this will be my last layer for this kiln shelf. When this plaster and water has dried on the kiln shelf, it actually creates a white powdery coat on the surface. All right, I still have enough water in my mix, so I'm going to use that now quickly to also apply it to my molds. There we go. And now what I'm going to do, whilst these are drying, I'm going to ensure that I throw this down, not a drain, into a dustbin. Because remember, plaster does block your drain. And wash your brush immediately, because if your plaster dries on your brush, you won't be able to use this again. Also ensure that your plaster has been sealed, that no water can come into this, because any moisture in the atmosphere will contaminate your plaster, that you also cannot use it. Hi everyone, I'm going to explain to you now the importance of prepping your kiln. One needs to ensure that the kiln is completely clean by vacuuming the inside, as well as going lightly over the elements to ensure that no dust or leftover plaster is sitting on the kiln elements or on the kiln bricks, as this dust can create devitrification again in our glass. So with glass, it's always important to make sure that the area is completely clean before putting our kiln shelf in and our glass in and switching the kiln program on. Oh, also another thing is to make sure that your glass is clean. Before placing it in the kiln, make sure you've washed it and you've dried it and that it's spotless and no dust is on it. I'm now going to vacuum just to show you. Alright, now our kiln has been vacuumed and ready for firing. This is our controller, and on our controller we put in our program, and you'll see we work with a little ramp system. Alright, so I'm going to first take you through the process and explain to you when the certain lights come up. So you'll see the first one at the moment is highlighted, is your first dot. In that dot, you'll see with these two little symbols here, you'll see a temperature and a clock. At the moment, just the clock is highlighted or displaying with a red dot. This means we are talking about time only. So for instance, if we want to delay our kiln firing, what we would do is, say for instance, we wanted to only fire first thing when we come in the morning, we could have put a delay in there for 12 hours so that when we come in the morning, it has started its firing process. Okay, we don't always use this, it's just there if you need it. Then we go again with our arrows and we go into our next program or next section within our program. Now you'll see the next dot is highlighted and you'll see that the time and temperature at the moment as well is shining with the red dots. This is now saying that we are talking about time and temperature. So how many degrees Celsius you want your program to go up according to your time. So if you wanted to go up 250 degrees an hour to 500, as an example, it will take 2 hours. Okay, then you go up to your next temperature. And you'll see we are just talking about temperature. So here, that was our time to get to our top temperature. So at the moment, you'll see the program is 680, but I'll take you through that step just now. So that is at the moment our temperature. Then we have our next dot that parallel is our, again, time only. So that is talking about a soaking point. So we can allow our glass to stay at a certain temperature. Next process, now we're ramping up again, if you can see by what the picture is showing here. So now again, we are working with time and temperature. So the time we want it to take up with the temperature till we get to our top temperature. Okay, Then we have, again, a delay. So it's the same process repeated. When we are on this process here, often one is able to open up the kiln. Anything above, I would say 680 is fine to open up your kiln to see what's happening, but never allow your kiln to drop lower than 680. This going down is our crash cooling. So this will be able to help us to freeze our glass in that process that we have just seen in the kiln. And then we'll go down to a temperature we normally want to hold our glass. And then from this process, we talk about annealing. So we want our glass to go down slowly, therefore that it doesn't crack. Again, we can have a delay of temperature, and then we could go down with our annealing slowly as possible, depending obviously on the thickness of the glass, until normally room temperature or 30 degrees, when we are able to open up the kiln. All right, so this is our high temp enamel firing. We do not need a delay, so we're going to start immediately, and we are going to go up 200 degrees an hour. So I'm pushing my up and down arrow at the top, which allows me to adjust my display at the top. Okay, then I'm going to go up to the top temperature I want for my middle section of my program, and I want that to be 580. Okay, our next section where we're going to allow our glass to soak is at 580. Anything between 60 and 580, our glass is under stress. So it's a point where we want our glass to go up slowly or go down slowly. So always keep that in mind. So now we're at our midpoint of 580, and I'm going to now put a soaking point of 10 minutes in. Our glass is not that thick, so we don't need to allow it to soak for that long. So why we put a soak in is that to make sure that our glass, the entire, not just the top surface, but the entire, from the bottom to the top, has evenly heated up in between. Then we're going to actually go up full. Our glass has no tension in it. Because our glass has no tension in it, we don't have to worry about taking it up slowly from 580. Remember, above 580, we can work at a much faster ramp if there's no tension. So what full stands for, basically, it's basically telling me that I want my glass to ramp up as fast as possible, or sometimes it may mean as fast down as possible to cool to a certain point. So I want my glass to go as fast as possible up to my top temperature, where I'm working with 815, which is according to my test pieces, my desired top temperature for my high temp enamel paints. I'm then going to allow it to soak for 10 minutes. 10 minutes is sufficient for this firing, and then I need to now crash cool. So now I'm not physically going to crash cool, which one can also do. You can assist the kiln by opening up the lid and crash cooling the kiln down to 680 if you're going to manually do it. If you're allowing your kiln to do it, you need to bring it down full. So again, now I'm making my kiln go as fast as possible down, and I'm going to rather anneal it a bit lower to 580, because this is now where my glass starts becoming under tension again. And then I'm going to hold there for about 15 minutes. And why only 15 minutes is because my glass is not that thick. If my glass was thicker, then I would hold it for longer, because it is important that the glass is evenly heated before annealing it down. You don't want the middle part of the glass, which normally takes longer to get to the desired temperature you have. So it's important to anneal and hold it there before bringing it down. Now I'm going to bring my glass down. Remember, again, the thicker the glass is, the slower this process will be. I'm only going to bring it down 100 degrees an hour to 30 degrees, and in this process it will slowly cool down and my glass won't then be under tension anymore. You're allowed to open the kiln, obviously depending on your outer environment, but in summer in South Africa you may open it up already at 60 degrees. Obviously in winter it will be a much lower temperature, but I always just put in 30 degrees just to be safe. Hi everyone, we now have our high temp enamel paint in the kiln, which we're going to fire to 815 degrees Celsius. They're both AMOGELANG works. The one is her sun design for the homeware and the other one is her jewelry piece. The jewelry piece, we are first going to fire the high temp enamel paint onto the glass to make sure that when we put the copper wire in between, that it does not move the paint at all. And the high temp for the sunrise for AMOGELANG, we need to make sure that the paint is well secured properly onto the glass before placing and fusing all the pieces together. My program is in the controller ready. I'm going to put my program on and I'm going to close it with just a little bit opening until we get to 100 degrees Celsius. This is to ensure that if any moisture is in our kiln, that it can escape. Hi everyone, I'm now going to explain to you the process. When we fire a high temp enamel paint, we normally fire it without the top layer, especially we want to fuse it between the two layers. And this is to ensure that there's no bubbles or anything trapped. Now I'm going to explain the process of fusing that top layer of glass on top of your fired enamel paint. We are not using a delay because we want our glass to start firing, our kiln to start firing immediately. And here we are going to take our glass up 200 degrees an hour. I'm taking it up not too fast because I'm fusing two pieces of glass together, so I want to ensure that it goes slowly here. And then taking it to my temperature point where my glass is the most fragile. I'm then taking it up to 580 because from 580 to room temperature, my glass is fragile. So I need to work with this process very slowly. I am then going to hold that temperature for 10 minutes. Actually, no, I'm going to hold it up for 15 minutes. Reason being because I've got two layers of glass and I want to ensure that my bottom painted layer is also at 580 before taking it up to its top temperature. I'm then going to take the glass up 250 degrees an hour up to my top temperature of 820 degrees. And at 820 degrees, my glass will become soft and the edges will fuse to become one on the surface. So it will not be seen as two layers of glass anymore. I'm going to hold it there for 15 minutes to ensure that all my edges are soft and melted and that there is no air bubbles captured in between the glass. I then need to now crash cool the process to be able to capture that point and make sure we capture that glass in that moment. I'm then going to bring it down as fast as possible because I'm doing this via the kiln crash cooling, and I'm going to take it down to 580, and this is again where our glass becomes fragile. So we need to make sure from this process, from this temperature, from 580, we are bringing the glass down slowly again. Well, first I'm going to hold it, for 15 minutes to ensure that the entire piece of glass that we fused is all 580. And then from that, I am going to bring it down 100 degrees an hour, and this process is called annealing until 30 degrees or room temperature where we can open the kiln. We're now going to do the fuse of the glass pieces together of AMOGELANG's homeware and her jewelry pieces. Inside the kiln, you'll be able to see how we've layered the two half circles on top of each other with the triangles underneath. And basically what's going to happen, all these different objects that you saw previously from the high temp enamel firing will fuse together to become one piece. And then with the jewelry piece, what we've done is we've actually joined copper wire in between, and we flattened the edges with a hammer so that they will fuse together to become one piece. We're now going to close the kiln, leaving a little section open, and I'm going to switch the kiln on. And once it reaches 100 degrees Celsius, we'll close the lid. We leave it open so we can allow any moisture that's in the kiln to escape.